Hello and welcome to this briefing with the Jerusalem Press Club. I am Jonathan Beck, Director of Content. Our guest today is former National Security Advisor Dr. Eyal Hulata. Dr. Hulata served under Prime Ministers Bennett and Lapid in the previous government and is today a visiting fellow at the Federation of Defense for Democracies. He's been our guest many times. Good afternoon, Dr. Hulata, and good morning to you in America.
Hello, good day to everyone.
Where can we start? Where can we find the silver lining in the cloud of smoke that's been burning up the north of Israel? Regardless of the forest fires, talk has been heating up of high-intensity warfare in the north, potentially in the coming days. Can you tell us how realistic this threat is? Should we buy, blankets and mineral water, or is it a kind of massive game of chicken between Israel and Lebanon?
I think the situation is more volatile now than it was in recent weeks and months. I mean, we've been covering this topic in this forum, and maybe some of you have heard me talk about this before. And usually, my message was that if there was high enough an interest for Hezbollah to join the war, they would have done it. And this didn't happen so far. And clearly, I think the Israel strategy was not to open another front. But something has changed, I think, over the last week or two. There is a higher intensity of tit for tat than we saw before. Israel is more bold, I think, mostly because Hezbollah is more bold. The fact that Hezbollah started attacking communities and towns which are populated, because for a long period of time they chose very carefully to fire at places that they knew that the civilians were evacuated. But now they fire at Nahariya, they fire at the major cities in the north. I think it's becoming more volatile. It doesn't necessarily mean that this will transform into a war. I think that fundamentally the Israeli war cabinet probably would rather deal with the south, and the following days and maybe possible following weeks are the pick in decision making with the hostage deal. And I think that there is a genuine attempt by all parts to at least try to make the most out of it. So this is not the time for that. Maybe this is part of why Hezbollah is adding more tension to add more pressure on Israel. This has been the case in the past as well. I think this is the way we should look at the situation, but this can inflame very regularly. Is Israel preparing a strike? I might be asked, of course, by one of the journalists. So first, I don't know, right? I don't sit in the war cabinet to see this. I'll be surprised if Israel was not preparing for full escalation. I would be surprised, though, if Israel preempts it out of without a substantial provocation. But such provocations unfortunately exist. So you asked about blanket and bottles of water. We all need to prepare. I mean, I'm coming with my family to Israel for about a month in a couple of weeks, so I'm not canceling any of my plans if that assists any of the people in the audience.
So, on the optimistic note that there's going to be a landing strip for you to land on, I mean, seriously now...
But Jonathan, seriously, let's not overreact on this. I mean, seriously,
Hezbollah has been self-restraining to a line which is this kind of consensus of attrition. But should Israel go out to a more intense warfare, we have no, the height of the flames is not really something you can control in a very, there is another side. There's people there. They have their own politics. They have their own, it's a very dangerous game indeed. And
you mean in Lebanon? Look, I think that Hezbollah's calculus is different than if I may, than what I think I understood from your question. Their calculus is and their reliance on the sentiment and the public in Lebanon is not remotely close to what we would experience in the countries where we in the audience is coming from. They don't control Lebanon the way Hamas controls Gaza, but when they say that their position and their role is to be guardians of Lebanon, they mean this by war, not by stability and security. They are the manifestation of resistance even before Hamas learned those strategies from them. This is the reality as it comes to Hezbollah. I think they don't want this now not because they are afraid of what will happen to Lebanon, but because this is premature from the Iranian strategic calculus. If that does happen, of course, this is going to be very, very ugly because they do have a lot of rockets, and the rockets can reach almost any point in Israel. You don't need to be a genius to know that we have less interceptors now than we did before 7th of October because we used some of what we had. Of course, the parts have been replenished, but it's the number counts are not ideal. That's for sure. Also for munition, this is not ideal terms for that. But wars don't come in ideal times. Hamas did not open the war in ideal time for Israel. On the contrary, and I think that Hezbollah will, when they choose to do this, they will try to pick a point where they think they have better chances of inflicting a lot of damage in Israel. This might be the scenario where they think that this can happen. The way I know the IDF, the way I know our establishment, we have enough reserves, and we have enough to inflict the damage that is necessary on Hezbollah. This won't be short. There will be a lot of damage. But to what you alluded before, I don't think the Ben Gurion airport will be. I mean, of course, it will be shut down when there are rockets because it might happen, and it's going to be a pity because the European and American airlines just decided to fly back to Israel again, and I don't want them to stop. I think it's important that this continues. But putting the smiles on the side, yes, it's going to be very, very devastating. I think the problem, and I think some of the audience have heard me say this before, unfortunately, given the circumstances, I think really it's more a matter of when than a matter of if. Anyway, because if Hezbollah is not going to remove their forces from the border, and I don't see any political agreement brokered by the Americans or the French or anyone else that would be robust enough over time to keep Hezbollah away from our borders. Unfortunately, I think that it's just a matter of time until we will need to do it ourselves and to remove them from the border and take care of the infrastructure of Hezbollah close to the border. I just don't think that this is the right timing for this. I think we need to finish the hostage deal. I think it's important to have a ceasefire. I think there are many things that are happening within the war in Gaza. We're running out of our ability to change things dramatically in Gaza. The operation in Rafah is limited in its scope, and in a matter of weeks, we're going to finish what we're doing there anyway. So something will need to change dramatically. Of course, the political situation in Israel is deteriorating. You all live in Israel, so you all see this very vividly. I don't think this is a time for a war with Hezbollah of that sort. But again, Israel is not the only one that its opinion counts whether or not we have a war in Lebanon.
Okay, so let's assume it's not going to be a high-intensity war. Essentially, the other option is this kind of detente with a maybe slightly injured, 330, 340 something fighters killed, some terror infrastructure, but essentially this terror army in Lebanon as a deterrent threat against Israel. I mean, this is a reality, right?
You ask about deterrence, and again, this is something that I addressed before. I don't think the term deterrence represents anything that is relevant to what's happening in the north or happened in the south. And I must admit, I said that before October 7th. I think we're confusing opportunistic nature of our enemies with deterrence. They're not deterred by Israel. We're just waiting for the right time to do this. Their reasoning is different than ours. They're not really feel responsible for their own people. So what they calculate as damage is different than us. And I think this is the same with Hezbollah. My argument on Lebanon has been for months now. This cannot continue the way it does anyway. What I thought we need to do is to announce, and again, I've said this weeks and months ago, to announce that come September 1st, we're opening all of the schools in the north of Israel. And we are returning them to their homes. And to make sure Hezbollah understands that if they continue to fire after we've done so, then yes, Israel will need to go into war with Lebanon. But then it will be triggered in a way that can also potentially allow them to withdraw, because at the moment there was no reason for them to withdraw from their attacks on Israel. I think this was a good message also to the international community. All those who think that they can broker a deal between Israel and Lebanon, this is the beginning of June, and we have until the beginning of September. That's 3 months. Go ahead, broker the deal so that we can bring our civilians back to live in their communities. Because by September, it's going to be almost a full year that they haven't been in their homes. That's inconceivable for our country in this regard. Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the north yesterday. I followed this on the media. I was hoping to hear things along these lines. I didn't. And I think that's bad. I think this is the kind of thing that it was important to say. I'm also questions in real time whether or not we should have ordered all of the civilians to leave all of the communities in the north of Lebanon. I think we'll play to Hezbollah's hands in this time. But this is where we're at this point. We cannot continue this attrition the way we do now, because this does not allow us to plan. This does not allow the IDF to plan. This does not allow us to have objectives that we can see that are moving ahead. And I think we need to change that calculus. But for this, we need proper decision making in our government. And I think that we're not experiencing that for a long period of time.
Okay, before we move on to the southern front in Gaza, I would just like to forward 2 questions from journalists. One is from Newsweek, basically asking about the scale of destruction and casualties we should prepare for if the war in the north escalates to the level of a full conflict. So it's okay if you prefer not to kind of take a guess at numbers, because this is really not, it's quite a grim talk. Would you like me to ask the second question right away, or
yeah,
would
please.
you like to address this?
No, please ask the second.
The second question from a Spanish news agency is like, would a war in the north benefit Netanyahu politically, considering all the political things that are going on now?
Right.
And the second part of this question relates to Gaza. I'll ask you this when we move to Gaza.
Okay, I'll start with the first one. Of course, there will be damage. I think, by and large, we should. I'm not trying to undermine or to underplay that, but I think that the exhibition we've noticed on the night between April 13th and 14th about Israel's defense capabilities represents our capacity to defend our strategic sites and our center of urban populations. And I think that we can do this very well. In general, I think that our defenses are good when we're awake. Unfortunately, on October 7, we were not alert. But when we are alert, I think our defenses work very well. Doesn't mean there won't be casualties. We need to remember that Israel has invested a lot of money and effort to provide shelters to all of our civilians, because we do think it's important to defend our civilians when there is war. So there might be damage to property, but I think the ability to protect the lives of our civilians is substantial. I don't want to get into numbers. I think it's not wise to publicly tell our enemies how we estimate their damage, but just take at face value that what I said was not propaganda. I know what our capabilities are, and I think that we should expect us to be able to protect our civilians quite well for a period amount of time. Naturally, I think any war shouldn't be too long, and we will need to do whatever is necessary so that this conflict in Lebanon does not extend beyond a reasonable amount of time. To the second question, look, I have to say it's very difficult. I'll put it this way. I think it's very difficult for reasonable people to understand Netanyahu's political calculus. And I think Netanyahu's idea of what helps him politically or no is way more sophisticated and than any of us, at least me, can understand and comprehend. I think in basic terms, the answer should be no. Wars are not good for politicians. This is the reason why Netanyahu, who has been in power for so many years, managed never to get into a war. And I can tell you he did a lot to make sure that this wasn't the case, because he knew that once there is a war, he cannot control the outcomes, and this won't be good for him politically until October 7 come and surprised him, of course. Everything has changed, I think, since October 7. Netanyahu is making political decisions that I'm surprised by, including in certain aspects extending this conflict and not pushing for for end also when there were opportunities for it. And as for the North, I think he refrained from going into war because of those considerations, but he might think it's differently. I want to say, though, I want to think, I hope that political decisions will not be at the core of decision making on whether or not we go into war with Hezbollah. Of course, this is important. This is a responsibility on our leaders, on the prime minister, on the other ministers in the cabinet and in the war cabinet. And I truly hope that the citizens in Israel can trust their policymakers and decision makers, that they will make these decisions based on the concrete evidence and strategy and not on political considerations.
Okay,
Please.
thank you for this. Let's move to the south, to the long war in Gaza. It's essentially it's in a holding pattern. Yeah, I mean now Rafah is like the last big obstacle. The army is working there. It's going to overtake the Philadelphia corridor. Setting aside now international pressure, the ICC, Israeli politics, and all that stuff. Very simple question. People in Iroz, Be'eri, all those places, when will they be able to, plow their fields without fearing the red alert sirens? Are we like months away from this, years away from this? Like, what should be expected in this sense?
There are various potential ways for this to end, and I have to say that Israeli policy have a lot to do with that. I think that it is important to reach an agreement on the hostage deal at the moment, bring home those who are still alive before they're all murdered one by one. That entails a ceasefire, which I think is important also to allow different conditions to think of how we can reestablish stability in Gaza after that. I don't think, though, that our conflict with Hamas will end once this deal is signed. I think that as long as the current leadership of Hamas in Gaza prioritizes regaining their capacity to attack us over rebuilding Gaza, it will be very difficult to have any different conditions there. I think as long as this Hamas controls Gaza, there is no future for the Gazans in Gaza, and that will mean that we'll still have a level of conflict, I think, and this can extend for a long period of time. Now, we need to remember the citizens of the south, of those communities, including Niroz, Be'eri, but also Netivot, Sderot, Ofakim, and others, have lived there for years under sirens, and were willing to do so when the level was reasonable and when they had trust in the government that they will do whatever was necessary, not only to limit that, but ultimately to move to a better future. This social contract has been torn on October 7 between the population and the government. But we will need to reconstruct that. I think this is a core responsibility of the government. I think if the government refuses to assume responsibilities, I see more and more ministers say on the media, unfortunately, then it's difficult for the civilians to trust that their government is operating from the right objectives. But I think that this must be restored. In my opinion, maybe we need an election before that, and we need a different government for that. But I think this social contract will be restored. It must be restored. Israel cannot return to be a normal country without this social contract restored. And once it is restored, I think we can also reconstruct our communities in the south. I said that, I think we should start reconstructing our communities in the north already. But I guess the government doesn't think like me on these terms. We cannot continue to play this game just by counting the number of rockets that they are sending. I think the amount of damage inflicted on Hamas since October 7 is immense, but this will not destroy them fully. I put a lot of emphasis, and I said this before in our conversations, we must end the smuggling of arms, money, and people in and out of Gaza from the Egyptian border. And I think this must be done not only from the Gazan side, but a lot of it must be done from the Egyptian side with involvement in the international community and other forces, and with allowing Israel to participate in this in some sort. We must make sure that Hamas cannot replenish. If Hamas cannot replenish, they will not be able to pose the threat that they did on Israel before that, and we can start navigating towards a different reality in Gaza. As for the time frame, I was hoping that the deal for ceasefire can happen in a matter of days and weeks. I'm not sure it's going to happen. We'll have to see. The operation in Rafah also has a time limit to it. Several weeks, several months at most. After that, at the end, we will come to Philadelphia corridor to all of its length. What I read in the newspapers is there were already about 2/3 or 3/4 of it already, and then it will be holding. The IDF is not built and wasn't ordered to create a condition to hold the Gaza Strip or to manage it militarily, nor do I think we should. And the civilian governance of Gaza is something that this government has completely refused to deal with or to talk about. So those are the issues that I'm worried about looking into how much longer it will be in Gaza and what will be the prospect of stability there. It's not just the military aspect, it's all of the other aspects.
Okay. Well, first of all, assuming even the IDF manages to eliminate every final Hamas terrorist and leaves Gaza in ruins with the evacuees, one could guess that in a vacuum, whatever is going to grow there is not going to be a Jeffersonian democracy. It's probably going to be some Salafi version of something or some Islamist new version of something. So from what you say, I gather that in your view, Hamas remains like with its label, with its branding of Hamas on its feet after this is over. This is what I read between the lines that you said, yeah?
Again, I think we bear responsibility for that. If it was up to the things I've been proposing, we would have started creating an alternative to Hamas, a civilian alternative to Hamas in the beginning of the war, along with IDF's pushing into Rafah, so that the distribution of humanitarian aid will be done by Gazans who care for the Gazans, and by Palestinians who care for the Gazans, and not by Hamas who disrupt the convoys all the time. If it's only military capabilities that we put into Gaza, then we shouldn't be surprised that Hamas is resurrecting with what it can, and we won't be able to get them to the last gunman. I think it's a complete failure of strategy to create an alternative civilian governance in Gaza in parallel to what the military has been doing quite effectively. But this was a responsibility of the government, and Netanyahu wouldn't make any of those decisions. So I don't think it shouldn't have been this way. This shouldn't have been the outcome that now seems unfortunately so trivial, that Hamas is going to continue to rule Gaza. I think we had opportunities to change that, and we missed them because of political reasons, unfortunately. But now I hope there is still time to do something meaningful about it. But Netanyahu needs to make that decision. He needs to respond positively also to approaches by the regional countries who told him that they will be willing to participate, but they need to know that this is a part of a larger plan that ultimately would lead to stability. And at this point, right, even the normalization with Saudi Arabia is on hold because of those exact reasons. And this current government, Netanyahu and his extreme ministers to the right of him have no intention of making any decisions towards that end. I think this is unfortunate, and I think that we as Israelis are going to suffer from that, and we will need to potentially wait until there is a new government to start working from the conditions that will be left to us. Because militarily, I think the IDF is doing a very good work and a very good job in what they're doing, even though we're criticized in the international media for too many unintentional casualties. I think that no one is able to really appreciate the immense work that is done by the IDF. But on the strategic diplomatic fronts, I think we're doing very poorly, and clearly that is for political reasons.
Okay, so let me forward you a question from Bloomberg. Why would Hamas basically negotiate a hostage deal with us? That essentially means it signs its own death warrant. Because Israel has not been, it's been doing the negotiations and sending the teams to Cairo, but it has not changed its tune that, the complete dismantling of Hamas is its end goal for the war.
Well, I think nor should it. We're negotiating with Hamas, with an enemy who's sworn to murder us. There is no basic trust. This is not like a peace agreement that is done, a truce between countries trying to settle the conditions for stability for a long period of time. I thought for a long period of time that Hamas will only agree to a hostage deal when it has no other choice. And for that, we needed to use our levers and to choke its lifelines, its financial lifeline that comes mainly from Qatar, and its physical lifeline that comes through the smuggling routes from Egypt, and to put them in a condition where time is not on their side, and they need to choose between bad and worst options. When they need to choose between bad and worst options, then releasing the hostages, buying ceasefire, and potentially maybe conditions that can allow them to maneuver in some way should have been what they needed to do. Well, in reality, what happens over time is exactly the opposite. Israel has maneuvered itself into a position where we need to choose between bad and worse, even though we had significant military achievement. So this is not about why would they. This is about how do we get to conditions when this is the option that they have to choose. This is the kind of negotiation that we're having here. It's similar to negotiations that we had in the past, not only with Hamas but with others. Hamas is not a country negotiating with Israel. It is indeed a terror organization.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to forward you the second question from the Spanish news agency in relation to the fact that you more or less praised the IDF's performance, let's say tactically and strategically in Gaza. I mean, I know we talked about this in past briefings, but I'm asking again, why is the Israeli army going back again and again to places that have already been essentially cleared and, given back, zuku,
right,
so to speak in Hebrew?
So I think that's a good question, because it says something about the way that the IDF is operating in Gaza and in general. And I think it's justified, even though we may need to change that in the future. The IDF entered Gaza with a clear understanding, also a directive by the government, that we're not reconquering Gaza to hold it, that we are there to eliminate Hamas strongholds and to create conditions for stability once the IDF withdraws from Gaza. So the IDF did not build itself clearly before the war, nor does it now, to have enough masses of soldiers to be able to hold Gaza and to occupy it or conquer it for a long period of time, for a host of reasons, right? I mean, the army, even though we have mandatory drafting, the military is not large enough for all of those issues. We have many more soldiers in the north, unfortunately preparing for a situation where we might need to operate there. And of course, West Bank isn't getting any calmer by the day or by the week. And there is a limited amount of time that we can have reservists be drafted continuously in the military. We have an economy. Israel is small by all accounts to that. I think what the IDF has done well is to monitor the places where it left, to be able to come back again when necessary with far less amount of soldiers and for way shorter a period of time. So if we take the hospital in Shifa, the first time we entered there, it took a long period of time and a lot of forces, and of course we did this with a lot of care and attention. The second time we got in there, it was, I think, less than a battalion that did it overnight, and we arrested and killed and arrested hundreds of terrorists who returned to Shifa Hospital to hide in the basements of that facility. And we will see this again. I think the military will not, I will use this word, just excuse my poor English, the military will not volunteer to hold the civilian territories in Gaza just because they understand that there is vacuum created because of lack of strategic decision makers and diplomacy arrangements that will create conditions for civilian governance. This is not something that the IDF will volunteer to, because they know exactly what will happen. There will be a lot more conflict with the locals and the Hamas gunmen, and this will detract from the more important missions, in this case now in Rafah, and reaching the Philadelphia corridor and taking care of the tunnels that are there, and hopefully achieving the something that is very important, that's reaching the heads of Hamas and removing them from leadership. So this is the balance that the IDF is striking, and I think we'll see this more and more. I sit here in Washington. The generals here always, the veterans and generals come and say, you should have read our books. First you conquer, then you hold, and then you build. The IDF is not the US military, and Gaza is not Iraq. And this is not the way that our military strategy work, nor should I think it should work. I advocate for creating a civilian governance that will take care of this vacuum. The problem that I think is happening is that we're doing neither, right? We're not sending the military to fully hold and build, but we're not creating conditions for an alternative civilian governance. And the outcome is somewhere in between, which, like in other things that happened with this government, is going to be the worst of all options.
Okay, thank you. I have another question from Newsweek, one from myself, and another question. Let me first ask my own question. In Philadelphia, do you think, unlike elsewhere in Gaza, will the IDF hold Philadelphia for a lengthy period of time? I'm talking months, maybe a year more.
They might. I hope they don't need to. I hope we're able, in parallel to that, to reach the right arrangement with the Egyptians to take care of the smuggling from the other side of the border, because the tunnels, they reach Gaza, but they also come from somewhere, and that is Egyptian side of Rafah.
Let me just interject. Isn't this a bit naive? Wasn't the whole kind of opposition to Rafah in the first place somehow tied to? There were reports about like a family that's related to Sisi that makes money from. I mean, obviously the Egyptians are not the partner for this endeavor.
I didn't mean the Egyptians only as a partner. There is a multinational force operating in Sinai called the MFO. There is American involvement. There are other countries who are willing to engage in this. When I say take care of it from the Egyptian side of Rafah, I didn't mean to trust the Egyptian military. We've done more than was out in the public with the Egyptian military over the years, but that doesn't mean that we should put our trust in them. But dealing with this from the Egyptian side by far is going to be more easier than dealing it from the Rafah side, given the right arrangements with Egypt that allows the things that need to be done. We need to rebuild the Rafah crossing. We need to have, eventually, I think we will need to build an underground wall very similar to what we have in Israel, which eliminated penetrating tunnels through it. So there are also temporary things we need to do with the Egyptians on this. I don't want to get into too much of the details, but those are things that we started dealing with when I was National Security Advisor, but our government unfortunately didn't survive enough to fulfill that. And I think this is unfortunate also in this regard. I think there are solutions for that. However, having said that, I think that once we get to Philadelphia, and once this is the solution to the tunnels, and this might be the solution for a while, if the government isn't willing to make other diplomatic arrangements in this regard, then the answer might be yes, that the IDF will need to stay in Philadelphia for a long period of time. And I'm old enough to remember how it looked like before the disengagement. And there was a reason why Arik Sharon insisted also on leaving Philadelphia, even though I thought that strategically he did not create conditions to solve a problem alternatively, but the implications of that on the IDF will be severe. But if this is what we need to do, then this is what we'll do.
Okay. I'm going to ask you the final two questions in the descending order of how depressing they are. The first one is Avigdor Lieberman spoke on the radio, I think this morning or maybe yesterday, and he says Iran is planning like a full-scale, a Holocaust level attack against Israel. So I know we're kind of in an area where, when elections are being smelled in the air. So maybe Lieberman is also doing a campaign. But can you comment to that? How realistic his assessment is, or how alarmist?
So I try in any of those briefings to make sure that we don't forget to talk about Iran. And the reason for that is that I think that Iran ultimately is benefiting from what's happening now. Mark Dubovitz, the CEO of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy that I work in, says that Iran has deployed the weapon of mass distraction, keeping us all busy with all of the other issues while they can strategically continue to do what they're doing. Iran is closer to a bomb than ever before. These days, is the Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency is convening in Vienna to discuss the violations of Iran of the Nuclear Safeguards Agreement, not the JCPOA, the Nuclear Safeguards Agreement that they've signed, and the outcome is very, very bleak. It was posted here in the US that the Americans were trying to block the Europeans from flooring a resolution against the Iranians. I have to say that I haven't noticed specifically what happened yesterday, but I understand that the Europeans have intended and maybe floored the resolution, but that's just one small thing that needs to be done, because Iran is capable, should they choose to dash to nuclear weapons. And if they do that, the Middle East will look totally different, and that is a huge problem by all of us. I think we all need to understand that this is not only Israel's problem. Even while so many of the countries think that Israel is worth criticism, which I think is way unbiased and unjustified. But even if they do that, if Iran becomes nuclear, this is not just Israel's problem. This is a regional problem, and potentially this will be a global problem, because once Iran proves that they can do this, then other countries might think that they can do this as well. And all of the world order that were built and kept for decades after the Second World War will break into pieces. That's a huge deal. I think Lieberman is right in putting this out. I don't want to relate to the political aspect of what you said. Of course, he's in a campaign. I think they're all in a campaign. Netanyahu is in a campaign since the war started, unfortunately. So I don't like it, but I guess it is what it is. But it is important to understand that while we are busy with everything that is done in Gaza, Iran continues to do what they do. I said this before. I think when Netanyahu is calling for an ultimate victory in Gaza, that's a nice catchphrase, but it doesn't mean the right things that we need. Israel doesn't need a total victory in Gaza. Israel needs a total security arrangement with our enemies and adversaries, and Iran is the largest of them, and Hezbollah is the most dangerous proxy of them, and Hamas, which is, I think, the weakest of Iranian proxies that would even start talking about, the Houthis that continue to fire ballistic missiles on Israel. So I see in the media, and you asked me that question before we started this session. There are so many other things we need to deal with, and I think that we're not paying enough attention to them while we're continuously digging just in Gaza. Of course, not to say this isn't important, but this is not the only thing that is important. And Iran is definitely not getting the attention we need from our policymakers. And I hope that the defense establishment is doing what is necessary to prepare. I hope from Washington, difficult for me to know.
Okay, thank you for this, Dr. Hulata. The final question is a specific question about Gaza. The humanitarian aid pier. Now it's broken down, it's being repaired. When it was working, it was not clear how significant the amount of aid that went over it was for the Gazans. I mean, this is just this is my words, not the reporter's question. Is this a PR stunt by the Americans in a sense, this whole floating pier thing?
I'll be very careful from grading President Biden on the pier, but let me say this. I think from the start it was clear that the problem is not the ability to get aid into Gaza. The major problem is the lack of mechanism to distribute the aid in Gaza and to make sure that it gets to the people who need it in the temporary tents and houses and other arrangements that they have in Gaza. And the pier was not intended to solve this, because the Americans did not, in any case, in any point, intend to have boots on the ground in Gaza, nor does the IDF take care of all of this distribution. So, I think that the pier, I don't want to call it a stunt, it's not, again, for me to grade, but this is not the major problem that needs to be solved. The major problem that needs to be solved is the distribution, to make sure that the aid gets to the right places. There is more aid in Gaza than is covered by the international media. There shouldn't be, there is, I don't think there is a real man-made famine in Gaza, but there's definitely more food getting into Gaza that doesn't get and reach the people who actually need it, the poor people who actually need to get that aid in their places, because Hamas is not distributing it, because it's not in its intention to do this. Its intention is to make Israel look worse than it already is. So, I think that is the message over the pier. If the Americans decide to rebuild it, it's a decision made by the Americans. I think what's more important is to use what they can and their levers as they can on Israel and others to make sure that there is a better civilian governance arrangement that can actually distribute that humanitarian aid once it gets there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hulata, for this briefing. We covered a lot of ground. I hope by the time you get here, I don't know if peace will break out, but I hope it's going to be relatively peaceful when we shake hands in Tel Aviv in a couple of weeks or so.
Looking forward to seeing those of you who will come to the physical meeting. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.